So I added a few things to my ranked choice voting still sucks. This will be ranked choice voting still sucks part 2, a little continuation of that previous essay. I know you're real excited about it. So let us run the deficit between first and second place pertaining to presidential races from 1912 to the present for all races and all races where nobody got 50% of the vote, popular vote plus 1. Pertaining to the second part, I will be excluding races where the popular vote winner did not win the Electoral College, which is 2016 and 2000. Senate races are a different animal, not subject to the Electoral College in one race in one state, whereas a POTUS race is in 51 or 50 or 48 jurisdictions, depending on how far back you go. So the average margin of victory in presidential races, 1912 to present, popular vote winner from second place, that average was 11.27%. And the population standard deviation was 8.108%. And I'll have all this transcript at Rumble too, so you don't even have to listen to me if you don't have to. Here are the deficits between first and second place, where the winner of the popular vote also failed to breach the 50% plus 1 mark. That average was 5.285%, and the population standard deviation was 4.578%. Comparing those two sets of data, the contests, again excluding 2016 and 2000, where the winner of the Electoral College did not breach 50% plus 1, those races had deficits between first and second that were within one standard deviation of all POTUS contests since 1912, not an outlier. So again, the whole just because somebody doesn't get 50% doesn't mean they didn't win big. So that was not an outlier. So those people say, oh, if you don't get 50%, it must have been a close race. Not necessarily. If we take all presidential races since 1912 and exclude the ones where the popular vote winner did not cross the 50% plus 1 threshold, we have an average of 13.474%, and the population standard deviation was 8.011%. Comparing those two sets of data, we do have an outlier, though, and going into it, I did not think it would be, but I was wrong. Now let us look at the winner of the popular vote, and I will include all elections from 1912 to present and see how that stacks up against those other elections where the winner of the Electoral College won enough electoral votes in states where that person did not have a popular vote majority in that state, and compare that to all POTUS elections from 1912 to present. All POTUS elections since 1912, national popular vote average percentage for the person who won the Electoral College, that comes out to 52.563%. Standard deviation was 5.38%. And presidential elections since 1912, where the winner of the Electoral College would not have won the Electoral College if we exclude states where they got electoral votes and they didn't get 50% plus 1. So in those races, the average was 47.658%. And that even includes Reagan's in 1980, because he won almost half of his electoral votes in states where he didn't hit 50%. But nobody's going to say, oh, that was a close election. That average was 47.658%. And that is barely within one standard deviation of the average of all presidential elections 1912 to 2020. Again, just because that magical 50% mark is not obtained by someone, so what? And I can add the data above indicates those elections are not an outlier. Again, I understand presidential elections are a different animal than Senate races, but if we are to haggle about 50% plus 1, who is going to argue that Ronald Reagan did not have a seismic victory in 1980? He got a lot of electoral votes, as I mentioned, in states where nobody hit 50%. So did Jimmy Carter. So what? Bill Clinton in 1992 and 96 got a boatload of electoral votes in states where he didn't hit 50%. So what? That means Democrats and Republicans need to do better, and so do third parties, because the only thing they are spoiling are the chances of the Republicans and Democrats to hit 50% plus 1. I am really closing this now. If your state has not officially kiboshed any push for ranked choice voting, write your elected officials and get them to do it in the next session. If Libertarian Green or any other party voters want to be spoilers, let them throw their vote away in the general election, which may simply result in the winner being south of 50% of the vote. Or Republicans and Democrats need to get better at convincing those folks to join their bloc. They made their decision. They do not like Republicans or Democrats. They should not be allowed to decide the election, essentially after it has already been decided. They should not be allowed to decide the election by voting for someone else who is not their preference. Again, I'll mention, and Gary Johnson said this in 2016, if you put registered Republicans over here in one corner, Democrats in another corner, and then all the indie voters that aren't affiliated, the indie voters are larger. So all they have to do is get behind the Libertarian or someone else, and if they all vote for him, that person becomes president. But they don't do that. They keep voting for Republicans and Democrats. So register with one, or you don't vote in the primary, in my opinion. Pretending to read the minds of voters is one of the calling cards of RCV. They must be holding their noses. Maybe everyone is holding their noses. I held my nose for Gary Johnson in 2016, despite the fact he's an open borders nut job. If they are holding their noses, so what? Maybe more folks need to get involved in primaries and less in general elections so we can have more Rand Paul in the GOP and less Mitch McConnell. I hope you find the above data interesting and helpful. Should you run into one of these schmucks that is pushing RCV in open primaries, Mr. Chairman, I finally yield back.